Matthew chapter 27, beginning at verse 27. Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers round him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spat on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed the written charge against him, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He is calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. And the rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. And now we have a reading from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 23, beginning at verse 39. One of the criminals who hung on the cross hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise."
We're continuing with our reflections. 4 men and 3 crosses. Only now there's just 3 men and 3 crosses. It certainly looks as if Barabbas has won, doesn't it? Hands down, he's got away with it. So now Pilate has Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. And Barabbas, now a free man, probably turned around just briefly as he made his escape. And there in the courtyard, surrounded by the angry mob, Jesus stood, bound to the whipping post that had been reserved for Barabbas. And as the whip cracked, I can imagine that Barabbas winced in the knowledge that it was his skin that should be torn by those thongs, at the end of which were attached pointed bits of bone or lead in order to inflict maximum pain. And it was a flogging that could only be inflicted on Jews. According to Acts chapter 16, citizens of Rome were exempt, but the lacerations were so often so intense, a person could die from that scourging. Now, mockery covers a multitude of things. Jesus had already endured mockery in the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, hours earlier. And now they disrobed him, and they clothed him in a scarlet mantle. They crowned him in thorny twigs, which they'd passed down on his head and made him bleed. They made him sit down while they thrust a scepter made of a reed into his hand. And all that, of course, made him look like a king. And so then they proceeded to have fun by adoring him, kneeling in front of him and acclaiming, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And then they spat on him, probably as they got up from their knees with that mock adoration. And then they'd strike him around the head with the reed. It's hard, isn't it, to imagine anything more demeaning, more contemptuous, more despicable. So covered with bruisings and deep-seated welts, Jesus went forth, carrying the cross on which he was to be crucified. Now it comes as no surprise that Simon of Cyrene was requisitioned to bear the cross after Jesus had carried it a short distance. Sheer physical exhaustion made it impossible for him to carry it very far. We remind ourselves of the words of Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. And then they come to the place called Golgotha, and they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall, which he just couldn't drink. And they crucified him, writes Matthew with amazing restraint. And his indictment: "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." No ambiguity there. Not even that he claimed to be King of the Jews, but simply Jesus, the King of the Jews. And they divided his garments between them by casting lots. And then they hung around and they kept watch over him. Yes, Jesus was kept under strict surveillance. Be in no doubt, he really died. But then as we think about it and we survey the scene, we realize that there were no longer 4 men, because one had been released. And there on a middle cross hung Jesus, the substitute, atoning not only for Barabbas, but for the entire human race, making himself an offering for sin, laying down his life. No longer 4 men, but 3, and still 3 crosses. Jesus was crucified with 2 criminals by his side. And we have to turn to Luke 23 to read a bit more about them. Maybe they were colleagues of Barabbas. They were certainly wrongdoers and robbers. And like Jesus, they had had to endure the long, painful trek up the hill to Golgotha. According to Matthew's account, they both began by reviling Jesus and heaping abuse on him. And one of them joined the military in their mockery. If you're the one who you say you are, then save yourself and save us too. But at last they grew silent. They too were suffering pain and agony. And then one of them turned to the other and calling over Jesus in the middle and rebuking his colleague. And then he owns up to his own guilt, acknowledging that his punishment was deserved. And then turning to Jesus in the moments before all 3 ceased to breathe, moved by the Spirit of God, this one thief repented and pleaded to be remembered in mercy by the one whom he now realized would return to his kingdom to rule in glory. Those words, remember me. That was the most he could hope for, I suppose, to be remembered. But Jesus promised him much more than he could ask or think. Today, says Jesus, you shall be with me in paradise, in heaven, in the garden of delights. And then all fell silent until that most poignant, penetrating, piercing cry. My God, why have you forsaken me? And then Jesus gave up his spirit. The beaten, bloody, bruised and battered corpse lay dangled, limp and lifeless. And the sun stopped shining, and the earth shuddered in disgust at what was happening as the sky fell dark. And the tombs broke open, and many holy people were brought back to life. And in the temple, the curtain was torn from top to bottom, signifying that believers now had access to God through Christ to the most holy place. And a soldier thrust a spear into his side and pierced the membrane around the heart, and blood and water flowed out like a fountain from that side. Jesus was dead. That was Friday. And yes, it definitely looked like Barabbas had won and Jesus had lost, because Barabbas lived but Jesus was dead. And as for the thieves on the other two crosses, we hear nothing more about them. And yet one of them would be remembered, more than remembered, but given access to the heavenly paradise. Now, here's a question for you to ponder. What would you have said to Jesus if you'd been hanging by his side? What would you have said to Jesus? We shall pray together. We shall hear some music. And then we'll be back at 2:00 for a further reflection. But in the meantime, think about what you would have said to Jesus if you'd been hanging by his side.
Silence, its veins throbbing with the sting of suffering, its cavernous spaces echoing with the cries of torture. Some had seen, some had heard the pain, the screaming agony of pain, the helpless aching of those standing near, the suffering of those condemned to die. Love seemingly ripped apart by the stress of separation. Am I near enough to see? Just close enough to hear? Or is it too much to bear? Seeing the guilty on the cross acknowledge the sacrifice. Hearing the guiltless from the cross offering life. Was it too much to bear for the condemned who was free to seek the love from the one dying to forgive? Wherever I find myself, Lord, I can seek your love. Wherever I stand, Lord, I can acknowledge your sacrifice. Wherever I am, Lord, you look toward me, saying, "This is for you." Lord, remember me.
Which were hanged railed on him, saying, "If thou be the Christ, say thyself and us." But the other answering rebuked him, saying, "Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation, and we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing disciple standing by, whom he loved. He saith unto his mother, saith he to the disciple, Behold thy There was darkness over all the land, and at the ninth hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, My God, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now from the sixth hour there came to pass a darkness over all the land, unto the ninth hour. And about the ninth hour, Jesus cried aloud and said, That is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that were standing near, when they heard that, they said, He calleth for Barabbas. And straightway one of them ran, and took a sponge, and filled it with some vinegar, and put it upon a reed, and gave him to drink. But others of them answered, But Jesus, having cried again aloud, was rent in twain, in from the top unto the bottom, and the earth did tremble, and the rocks were rent, and the graves were opened up, and there rose up many bodies of the holy ones that were sleeping. And came out of the graves after Jesus' resurrection, and went into the holy city, and was seen by many. But the centurion, and they that were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, when they looked on the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying,